Our idea is Scout's Odyssey, game about stories. To give you some background, you are a group of scouts. You sit around a bonfire, and the scout leader is about to tell a story. And he's wearing a sash full of badges. The leader points to one of his badges and says each badge is a story, and asking the scouts which one they would like to hear. And after they choose, the scout leader starts telling the story. But as he narrates, the environment around them changes. They are no longer at the campfire, but instead, the scouts themselves become the characters of the leader's story. As you have seen, so you pick badges to start each story. That's a form of level selection. And you control one scout as a protagonist. And you are experiencing a story basically from his or her imaginative eyes. That's why the environment changes. And the entire story is guided by a narrator. And he guides the protagonist's imagination. Him. And overall, we're just making a puzzle adventure game. You're interacting with other characters, you talk with them, you get clues from them, and you collect and combine items to solve puzzles, which progresses through the story. It will just be a linear story. It's chapter by chapter and badge by badge. We already have a lot of success stories for puzzle adventure games. It's a very tried and true genre, actually. For 2D ones, we have, for example, Frambo, Machinarium for an older title. There's, of course, LucasArts games. They have the Tentacle. There's Full Throttle. And given that you mentioned you have a leaning towards Unreal Engine, we have three artists, and we also have 2 programmers who already worked in Unreal Engine. So there's also, of course, 3D versions of these we can do, which, like, we have reference, for example, from Long's Journey, for example, very old title. There's more recent ones in Unreal Engine, for example, What Remains of Edith Finch. There's, of course, Siberia 3. Other game also stands out from these puzzle adventure titles because we have some mechanic highlight of our own. For example, we have the same cast, each assume a different role for each story. And this itself, it creates an interesting dynamic because we can explore their characters across different stories because they will take on different roles, but they would still be the same cast. Also, because we have a narrator, we can have the environment unfold in an interesting way. I'll demo this for you, and I will pretend that I'm a narrator. Let's say, and there I was, alone. It was night, in the middle of a forest. As you can see, as the narrator is narrating the story, the scouts start to imagine the world around him, and everything in the environment starts to unfold. Also, the narrator interacts with its listener, the protagonist, all the way across the entire story. And the scouts can also ask questions, and as he does, this also changes the environment because it alters his imagination. I'll demo it again for you. In the forest, there was a bear. The scout asks, was the bear big, as he imagined a big bear? The leader says, it wasn't. Bear becomes small. Scout says, did it have sharp teeth? Leader says, didn't have that neither. As you can see, now the bear he imagines doesn't even have teeth. Scout's confused. Wait, so the bear wasn't threatening at all? The storyteller says, haha, yes. In fact, it was smaller than you. It was just a bear cub. And now he imagines a bear cub. And as he imagines, the environment changes on its own. We have similar games where there's similar narrator-protagonist dynamic going on. For example, there's Stanley Parable. But unlike Stanley Parable, the player in our game can also choose what they would like to see. There can be dialogue options to impact how the environment will actually play out. For example, you can ask, is there a bear big? If you ask that, the environment will just play as how I was demoing. But you can also say, did you fight it, and skip this part? Then probably the bear will remain big in his imagination. You can also just counter the narrator saying, you're lying, there's no bear in these woods. Then maybe the bear would just simply not be there, or just be a fake cardboard. this narrator also throughout the story also help retain interest in the story on its own. For example, when you play old puzzle adventure games, for example, especially from LucasArts, there's Grim Fandango. You end up, the game is very interesting. You're exploring an interesting world, but you end up feeling quite lonely because you are alone in the world. If you don't really do action, the world doesn't react to you, and it's not really any feedback, and that sort of give you a void of a feeling of loneliness. But by just having a narrator, it helps a lot with that. For example, one of your games, which is Dear Esther, it had the protagonist and narrator, and as you go through the environment, the narrator would give you narration, just simply because it's very well written. And I was, just by having this narrator guiding me, I was very interested in playing through the entire game because I just wanted to go into new locations and see what the narrator had to say. And that just retained my interest, and that's what we plan to incorporate with the narrator as well. And we have had some storytelling considerations as well. The central theme would be coming of age, because it's a group of Cub Scouts. The Scouts' growth is what connects individual stories. They all live the Scout leader story, and these stories themselves test their own individual character flaws. So each story can be considered a story arc. It's also both a coming-of-age story of the Scouts leader, but at the same time a story of individual Scouts. So because the Scout leader is the one telling his own younger life, so his character would change throughout the story. But it's also each story of individual Scouts. So it was much more like The Last Airbender, this overarching story, but it's also enveloped by smaller ones. And we would target audience that are children from 8 and above. It's attractive because of the theme. There's a variety of adventure and growth stories, and it's much like why young adult adventure novels are popular. There's coming of age, which is suitable for people this age group, the Percy Jackson, Harry Potter, for example. Also the puzzles, they can be enjoyed by all ages. The linear story itself, they drive the players to see what happens later. We can build up suspense, and they would be more eager to finish the game. And as mentioned before, it also stands apart from other adventure games because of its narrator, main character interaction. And as this interaction happens, the actual environment would change around how it plays out. That's what's unique. Thank you. That's our pitch. Any questions?